Hey, welcome to Quick Take. I'm one of your hosts, Susie, along with James.
Susie, good morning.
James, are you being productive? Are you measuring your outcomes right now?
I am always being measuring. I always be measuring my outcomes.
Yeah.
Not my English or my grammar, but yes, my outcomes.
How do you get the best out of your people is always something that I think leaders struggled with always.
Yeah.
Always. How do you motivate? How do you get them focused? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And sometimes people think I'm going to use these metrics and I'm going to tell people that you're going to work 8 to 5, you get an hour
Right.
lunch. Like that's very old school. But that's what we're going to talk about today is how do you define boundaries and really inspire people to bring their best to work?
Well, it's a fun topic. I listened to this podcast. I wish I had more information. It just crossed my mind. That was talking about how essentially the 9 to 5 work week is really based on manual labor. And it's kind of what your physical body can accomplish given breaks at a certain period of time, what a person of certain age and physical abilities can accomplish. And that we are really now in a more mind driven, your brain is actually doing the work. And that productivity measurement of being in the office or working from 9 to 5 is really not only flawed for the kind of work we do, but also really, I think at the end of the day, a lazy way of measuring productivity. Maybe lazy, maybe outdated, but any way you look at it, ensuring somebody is doing something from 9 to 5 is really not a measure of productivity.
No. And everybody's different in terms of their productivity. I was just talking to over the weekend, one of my daughter's friends who was talking about she's a salary person and she works at home and she's like, I kind of feel guilty when I finish early and I have more hours. And it really makes me like, I don't like the work that I end up doing. I feel like I'm wasting time, but I feel like I have to put in those hours to check the box, which is interesting because it's also these parameters we give to people help alleviate sometimes that feeling of, am I productive enough? Am I earning my keep? How do we shift this?
I think in that case, that's just a hard wiring that says you have to work hard for 8 hours. If we were to have a magic wand, what I'd like to say is to my people, I understand what your capacity is. I think we have an agreement, not everyone's capacity, but yours. I'm able, with my magic wand, to fully appreciate when you are working at what I am paying you for. And now you and I have a contract that states that in some, not real contract, but a psychological, emotional, corporate contract. And now we will measure the output in those deliverables so we both know you're putting in the time. Or not, see, there we go. Even the language, putting in the time is flawed, that you are putting in the appropriate amount of energy for what I am paying you for. You know, as a leader, shoot, that's really hard to do on an individual basis. And so I think what we've done is reverted back to the simplistic of time and saying, all right, look, it's hard for me to know what all y'all are doing. So I'm just going to say I want 8 hours.
Yeah. If you said that to me, that I understand what your capacity is, I'd be like, help me understand that. What do you mean? Because I want to understand so that I can fulfill what you're saying and I can over deliver.
Well, think about what a mature and healthy well, I'm not even sure healthy is the right word. I mean, I don't know that I have the tools as a leader to extract and engage in that discussion to ensure we're aligned. It's really unique and cyclical and different. And read this really interesting article about brain activity. And the core of this article was talking about how light that is red in the spectrum tends to energize our brains. Think about this for a second. So if you think of this a cycle of day, for me, I have energy in 2 times a day. I have time early in the morning and then late in the day, evening, or later in the day. Actually also coincides with sunrise and sunset. When there's more red light in the atmosphere. And so the thinking from this researcher is that you typically are going to be most productive in the morning. Then in the afternoons, they're like around lunchtime, siesta time, you're not going to be so productive. And then later on in the day, as the sun is going down, you're going to have another productive sprint. And that's when a lot of people have their like side gig or their brain candy. So there's a school of thought that says if you want to be productive at your maximum amount, we should work early in the morning and late in the evening, and do menial stuff in the middle. And that's more brain oriented time slicing than physical oriented time slicing. And that's so wild to
It
consider.
is. It is. It's super interesting. What I love about this idea is when you started out, it's like it's such a great conversation to have. This is a great way of having the conversation. So take this kind of idea and ask your people to pay attention about when is their best brain time. Because for me, it is in the morning. And sometimes when I'm writing something or I'm doing something, I'm like, wow, that was brilliant. That was really good. That came really easy. So pay attention to those cues that you're like, oh man, I am like grooving. I'm getting this done. And for me, the later part of the day is the physical, like getting it done quickly, moving through something. So I really think about my day. So what a great conversation to have as a leader with your people to understand those ebbs and flows and be able to say, well, then do this kind of activity at this time of day and let's talk about what really works for you.
Right. And I think that avoiding or having the conversation around, I don't want you to look busy or I don't want you to fill the time. If you're a creative by and large, where you are, whether it's creating ad campaigns or creating project plans and ways that you can maximize resources, I mean, creativity goes a pretty broad spectrum. You should be in tune with yourself and understand when you're the most creative. The psychologist that did that study that I mentioned said that largely most people follow that cycle. Certainly phones, which also have that light spectrum, can mess with that a little bit and being on your phone a lot. But that hardwiring is really, really genetic and really, really deep in our evolution. So you can mess with it, but at the end of the day, it's pretty solid. And I think that knowing yourself, have that conversation with your manager so you can say, look, I may not be busy between noon and 3. I just don't do good work during that time. I can have meetings and I can take notes and I can do stuff. But if my power hour is really 4 to 6, then just let me have my power hour. I think that's a better dialogue.
I agree. But I think it's not a one and done. I don't think you have this conversation. I think that you need to put, as leaders, they should put on their calendar every quarter, how motivated, how energized is my team? And then you talk about it again. And the reason I say that is you're always going to run into these situations that you're like, I'm doing this wrong. And the example is this. I have a client who they had a VP level. I want to make sure everybody hears that. A VP level that everybody adored. And he left the business and she uncovered so much that was being done wrong. He wasn't really pulling his weight. There was just a lot under the rock. And she was like, so you know what her tendency is now? She wants to make sure she's over leading, over managing the other people, because to her, she's like, what did I miss? Why did I allow this to happen? How could this have been such a mess? My point is your mindset is going to be triggered by these situations that you're like, this is not the right way I'm doing it. But you have to continue to rediscover and help your team rediscover what keeps them really active and motivated, because that's a really important thing that I'm seeing across organizations is motivation, engagement. Those things are waning right now.
Well, so let's take that topic and tie it to this mouse jiggling kind of looking busy. And ultimately, what that means is we need to talk to our middle managers and say, you've got to start measuring these not only output outcomes, but also motivation outcomes, enjoyment outcomes, willingness to work here longer outcomes. And so whatever those metrics are, whatever those ways you can measure that, if I think about that manager who looked under the rock and found nothing but ants and angry employees, there's a knee-jerk reaction, which is to really hone your management of that. But I think a better one is to say, all right, how can I have gotten incremental output? What could I have measured there along the way in a very agile methodology sort of way to say, what are the ways that I could have seen that in small chunks to know that I was off track along the way without having to have that person, have them sit next to me in the cube and monitor their being at the desk all day long.
Yeah. So what comes to mind for me is taking that idea of having your team track their day, looking back, how did you spend your day and paying attention to your energy levels and allow them to baseline. And to your point, that metrics around, and then how did you feel in this chunk of time so that then they can recreate that? It has to be personalized, but then how do you help them get into those zones on a regular basis so they get that feel for their day and that can have some tangibility to you and them in the conversation about then how do we gauge this for you?
Well, how do we take advantage of you being at your peak? How do we find the moments in which you're really in the zone and loving the work you're doing and really focused on the accomplishments? And really just say, look, those are the times I want you to work, but we're going to measure you on this output. We're going to measure you on these metrics, not whether you logged in at 8:30. And I think that's a better method. Now, there are jobs where you have to be available. And if I answer calls or answer support tickets or anything like that, then just being there is part of the job. And I appreciate that doesn't apply to everybody. But in the knowledge workspace and in the knowledge workers, it's output and outcomes, not time in saddle.
Yeah. Let's talk about that measurement of time because we started out by talking about it being a linear form. And when you look at Gallup's research around strengths and really understanding what you do well, they have proven that when you understand what you're really good at and you invest in that and do that more, you can achieve excellence. And when you focus on the things that you don't do that well, you can get better, but you never can get to that peak of excellence. So what that means is the people that are at excellence are probably accelerating versus not. So now when you look at those times, then you can say and start the language around when you're at your peak, you're really outperforming yourself. And so rechanging that. So I love that research around when you're in the flow, those are the clues to you. You're chicking away like
Yeah,
in those times.
right. You're loving it and everything. And I think you're more productive. Your time is more better used and your output per moment, per minute, per hour, whatever is much better. Find a way to get in the flow and really engage in that. And I think work with your leadership to ensure that they appreciate that.
Yeah. And start talking about your metrics as being something that's not linear, that it can have acceleration. It's like driving on the highway versus
City
going
miles.
city miles, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And
Great conversation.
all right. Good topic.